Okay, I might start, Shane, will I shortly?
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Another minute. I see loads of familiar faces already. Okay, I think I might start if everybody's happy enough. We have loads of people still coming in, but I think I might move ahead. So I want to, first of all, sincerely welcome you all to our NUI Galway Rural Studies Seminar series called Rural Voices. And I want to thank all of you, first of all, for registering and for joining us for what we really hope is our first seminar of many seminars. And it really will be a fruitful dissemination of rural research and rural practices all around Ireland and internationally as well, where we will get a chance, I suppose, to listen to rural academics and practitioners from right across Europe and from the States, and particularly from our Irish colleagues as well in universities and institutes of technology all around Ireland. I want to thank the Department of Rural and Community Development for collaborating with us on this series, alongside, I suppose, our Rural Futures Higher Education and Research Network. And this network was established last year as part of a commitment via our Rural Futures, Ireland's National Rural Development Policy. And we'll have the Minister in a few minutes has recorded a lovely little video recording, and we're going to play that in a few minutes. Before we go to the Minister's video, I am absolutely thrilled and delighted to welcome our own president here in NUI Galway, Professor Ciarán Ó hÓgartaigh. And Professor has, our president has really, to our delight, suggested that he will open our seminar series here today. And really, he has been a wonderful supporter and a person who recognises the rural research that we do, the rural studies that we take part in via our students and via our research in NUI Galway. So I'm actually delighted that he's here with us today to open the seminar series. So I'm going to call on Professor Ó hÓgartaigh to open the series for us.
Thanks, Margaret. Mí mágat agus tá fáilte ó bhílig tá mana as Renewal live Hanona. Particularly pleased to be here to support this Rural Voices seminar series, because it fits very much with our strategy as a university. We launched the strategy pre-COVID. It feels like a long time ago now, but we named a number of particularly important aspects to why we exist as NUI Galway. One is that we're here for the public good. And clearly that's part of the mission here, that there's a great sense of community here, a great sense that we're here for each other and to serve each other in the communities in which we live. And NUI Galway is part of your community, and the rural communities that are represented here are part of our hinterland in many, many ways. And we're very pleased to be here for that reason. We also said we're here for our students, our society and our planet. And again, here, this is very important for us in the context of both our students. We draw the largest number of students from the furthest away of any university in Ireland. So if we look at a heat map of where we recruit from, we are the university that recruits most from outside its own town and furthest away from itself. And we're very conscious of our presence, therefore, not only in Galway, but in the rural communities more generally, and the society that represents, and the importance of that for the sustainability of our planet and of those communities in particular. And then we also said we coalesced around 3 and 4 values, which are particularly important to us, which again are represented here as one of those 3 pillars, if you like, for the public good, for students, society and our planet, and then 4 values on which we would base our work. The first of these and the greatest of these is respect. And we said at the time that from respect comes much else and everything else. And in particular, what we'd like to mark today is our respect for you as researchers, as practitioners, as people who live and have a lived experience in rural societies and rural communities. And I think the sense that we have today is that this is a two-way street, if you like. This is a dialogue that we learn from you as well as you learning from us. And very often universities are seen as, or see themselves as places where we know and therefore we teach, where in fact here we're learning from yourselves as people who have a lived experience in rural society. And I think we'll also be able to hopefully contribute to your own understanding of that space, but certainly having that respect for your experience and that respect for rural Ireland and rural societies and rural experience that's particularly important to us. Secondly, a sense of openness, and a value, or second value, is openness. And again, here we're open to virtually as it may be, but our campus is open to that broader perspective. And I'm particularly keen that we are open to communities who don't normally visit NUI Galway or don't normally see NUI Galway as part of their furniture. And again, I'm particularly pleased, therefore, to welcome you. As I say, virtually, I have the quad in the background, but hopefully you'll get the sense that you are part of NUI Galway today, and that we're very open to you as to your experience, to your knowledge, to your critique, and to the dialogue that will happen here. Open to new ideas and new perspectives, open to challenge, and open to welcome yourselves on, as I say, virtually, but hopefully over time in person on campus. The third area, the value that we committed to, was excellence, and that's very consistent with respect. If we respect ourselves and each other, we'll do our best work for each other. And I'm particularly grateful to Maura for her work in that regard, and both in research but also in practice. So understanding the importance of research for the lived experience. And I think this initiative in particular, and the goodness that comes from, the kindness that comes from, is very much part of that sense of high standards, and the work that's being done in the university being shared with others with those high standards in mind. So hÓgartaigh is more, it's íntac an Tracy and that's íntac on webinar and seminar seo tharrowing. And then finally, I think maybe the most important in this context, the value of sustainability, and our students really were keen on that particular value. Environmental sustainability being the one that people always think about, and we're very keen on at NUI Galway in developing that. We were awarded a gold star last year for our work in sustainability. But again, for me, that's much broader and much more multifaceted very often, in that my own sense is that we're also sustaining perspectives and disciplines and ways of thinking about the world, but also sustaining the communities in which we live. And whether that's language, community experience, the lived life that our communities have, that part of our role as a university is to help in sustaining and making better that life. And I think this is most important, I think, in the context of this seminar series, that we are coming together as a community of a university, practitioners, people who live in rural Ireland, to understand each other and to sustain each other, both intellectually, but also hopefully in the practice and the connection that research has with implementing policy. And I think the openness we have here to that work between the department, ourselves, yourselves, I think is very much part of that sustainability agenda, if you like. And that as a university, that's one of our most important missions, is to sustain a new generation of students, but also to sustain the communities in which we belong. So for all those reasons, when Maura asked me to say a few words, I said I'd turn up today virtually to welcome you and to launch the seminar series along with the Minister. And we're particularly grateful to all our colleagues and to the department and yourselves for the work you're doing here. Tréaslín liv, tá mé gan a bhuaictíh agus tá sulgum me an over roibh amach an seo go meg sé in bhúnathe chun taobh sin de sna cóúidir na bhfuil si buiteach agus guim gach rathaíomh. Thank you very much, and thanks, Maura, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Professor Octave. Yes, some really good words and ways in which we can open the seminar, ways in which we can, I suppose, really feel what we are about in NUI Galway, and I suppose how committed we are to rural research, to rural teaching, to this idea that we have about disseminating what we do and making sure that this is not just about academics, as the President has just said. It's not about us in any kind of ivory towers. A lot of our work is very much on the ground. We're very much connected with the people, the practitioners who work every single day in rural research. And I think that was a feel for what we got when we opened the seminar, or opened the network last year via the Department of Rural and Community Development. That idea of this network that we have in rural studies is one of the first networks ever to set up in rural studies in Ireland. And I think this seminar series has come out of that. So I'm delighted again to have all of those people from the network, from all of the universities and research institutes right across the country. So I think we also have a lovely short video clip that was recorded earlier last week and launched this morning by the press office in NUI Galway and by the Department of Rural and Community Development. And it's a lovely message from Minister Heather Humphreys, who again is a great supporter of rural research and rural ideas and rural practitioner as well. So Shane, I'm going to ask you to just play this very short little clip from the Minister.
I'm delighted to announce the launch of Rural Voices in partnership with the Rural Studies Centre at NUI Galway. This wonderful initiative provides a unique platform for Irish academics and rural stakeholders to put forward their projects and ideas as we work collectively to improve rural Ireland. It's critically important that we all work together, government, academia and society, to address the major challenges and to seize the many opportunities ahead of us. Rural Voices series is an exciting new opportunity for us to do just that. Initiatives like these very much reflect and complement the objectives of our rural future, the government's ambitious 5-year strategy, which aims to transform rural Ireland and provide more opportunities for our rural communities. Our rural future is already having a big impact on the length and breadth of the country. Its objectives can only be further realised by initiatives like these. I want to thank NUI Galway, in particular Dr Maura Farrell and her team, for their work on developing this series, and I'm looking forward to us all benefiting from its outcomes. For Renewal Mahogany.
That's great. Thanks. And thanks to the Minister and, of course, the Department of Rural and Community Development for collaborating with us on this. So I suppose maybe just as chairing our first session, I might ask everybody maybe to turn off your mics if you can at all. One of our biggest issues, I suppose, with webinars since COVID. So if we can turn off all of the mics.
What do you want to get rid of everybody that quickly, or you're Johnson?
Or you have access to turning off some mics.
Yeah, bad, isn't it?
Okay. You mute the mics on your end, Shane.
I'll have a look here now.
Okay,
Hang on
can
one
everybody
sec,
mute their mics if at all possible? That's
Yeah.
great. Okay, listen, I just want to say a little bit about the series itself and what we have committed to over the next year. We've committed to 9 seminars over the next year, so leaving out maybe the summer months and the Christmas months. And the seminar will run every the last Wednesday in every month from 3 to 4 o'clock. And at the moment, we really are hoping to tap into some of the research that's been carried out, but some of the projects as well and practices that are being carried out across the country. We did a little bit of ground research ourselves to find out what people wanted and what kind of seminar people wanted. And we did find out that people had quite a lot of webinars going on throughout COVID. And what they really wanted, they wanted to hear what kind of research was happening. They wanted to hear what was being researched in the country and how, I suppose, they could utilize this research. So that's where we're pitching the series at. So it's maybe not as interactive as some of the webinars that you've been on throughout COVID. But the idea is that every month you will hear a piece of work or a piece of research from either an academic or from a practitioner on the ground, either within an Irish context or within a European or international context. And again, we will provide the details of the speakers so you can connect with the speakers for further dialogue if that's what you hope to do. So again, maybe towards, if you have a question for our speaker today or for any of the seminars, maybe pop it into the chat, and we have a few people maybe that might work with the chat at the very end of the seminar. I suppose keeping in mind that today we might be a little bit more short of time because of our launch. Before I introduce our first speaker of the seminar, I want to maybe thank my own colleagues in the NUI Galway Studies Centre in Galway. I want to particularly thank Shane Conway, who's done an awful lot of the background work for the seminar series. But I also want to thank Aisling Murta and Louise Weir, who maybe do some of the questions today, and also other colleagues. I see John McDonough and Mary Mahan, who are also colleagues at the NUI Galway Rural Studies Centre. So I really hope that you enjoy the seminar series and it's something that you log into on a monthly basis. So without further ado, I'm going to bring us to our first speaker of the series and our first speaker in January. And this speaker, it's great to actually introduce this person because he has been, I suppose, instrumental himself in getting the series up and running. And instrumental, in fact, in a lot of the work we do in relation to our Rural Futures higher education and research network as well. So I want to introduce Dr. Andrew Forde. And Andrew is the head of the Rural and Strategy Social Enterprise at the Department of Rural and Community Development. And he is responsible for the development and the oversight and implementation of our Rural Futures, Ireland's new National Rural Development Policy. And he's also there as part of the National Social Enterprise Policy for Ireland 2019 to 2022. And he chairs the National Social Enterprise Policy Implementation Group and is the Irish government's representative on the European Commission's expert on social economy. He also chairs the Higher Education and Research Network on Rural Development. And Andrew himself holds a PhD in International Human Rights Law from our own university here in NUI Galway, so we're particularly delighted to have him with us. Prior to joining the civil service, he spent 15 years working with international human rights and civil society organisations, mainly in post-conflict regions. So I think we definitely don't have a better and more experienced colleague to open up our seminar series. So I'll hand it over to Andrew, and delighted to have you in our first series.
Thanks a million, Maura. Really appreciate it. Can I just do a technical check there? Can you confirm you can see the full screen PowerPoint presentation and not the speaker view?
Yes, we have that.
Okay, brilliant. Listen, thanks very much, Maura. And I suppose the first thing to say is my sincere thanks to President hÓgartaigh for the very kindly being with us to launch the seminar series, which we're very excited about. I noted his specific reference to, the fact that NUIG has a connection to its hinterlands. I think it's important to say that it has an impact far beyond its hinterlands. I think the level of research and the quality of research, coming out is really exemplary, and particularly when it comes to the Rural Studies Centre, the importance of that centre can't be underestimated. I think, and hopefully one of the messages you'll hear from me today is that actually we need more, not less, when it comes to rural development research, and particularly when it comes to the multidisciplinary nature of it. So thanks to Professor hÓgartaigh, thanks to Professor Farrell and Dr. Conway and all the other colleagues who've been involved in facilitating this seminar series, which again is the first of its kind, and very much speaks to the objectives under our Rural Future. Yeah, my name is Andrew Forde, as Maura rightly said. I've had the privilege over the last number of years of working on our Rural Future, the development of the National Rural Development Policy, but also on other important national policies such as the National Social Enterprise Policy, and so on and so forth. I'm going to take you through today briefly as I can, because I'm conscious of time. I suppose the genesis of our Rural Future, what it's trying to achieve, where it's situated, I guess, in the context of national policy, and really what we're trying to achieve through this policy document. In the context, I guess, of major challenges that we face on a kind of a mega, macro, meso, and micro levels, all levels, and I think it would hopefully will give a certain context for the remainder of the series. So, before I get into the policy itself, I just want to reflect a little bit on that context. You'll notice in this slide, I'm not going to refer at all to COVID, because of course that's been the overarching, the dominant narrative, the dominant priority, for good reason, for the past 2 years. So you can take it for granted that we recognize that is the backdrop. But we also need to move beyond COVID, in my view, and think about where we're going from here strategically. So the first thing I want to note is the whole issue of economy. The economy, for those of you who've seen the central bank's the reports this morning, will have noted that the economy is actually performing surprisingly well. Given the circumstances we've been through with the COVID experience over the past 2 years, the economy is performing very well, is resilient. And the question really for us now, and the challenge, is how to maintain that and how to ensure that we go from strength to strength in terms of the economic recovery. And by strength to strength, I don't mean just by, you know, the metrics around GDP and so on. I mean around the quality of our economy, the balance of our economy, the diversity of our economy, the inclusiveness of our economy. And all of those elements are critically important to a successful and sustainable economy. And on this point, I also want to make reference to the changing nature of work, that we now have a unique opportunity, given the fact that many of us have had the opportunity to work away from our offices, in our homes, as it may be, or in a different location for some time, and it's worked. Productivity hasn't necessarily dropped. Actually, what we've heard from the central bank this morning is that there have been potentially positive benefits around the inclusion of some cohorts. Women, for instance, never been higher level of female participation in the workforce. We don't know yet if it's directly correlated, but there's very strong reasons to believe that. The changing nature of work is really important for us to think about. Do we want to preserve the good bits of the remote work revolution, or do we really want to go back to where we were? My strong feeling is that we should preserve what we have, and remember that remote work is not about working from home in the box room like I am today. Remote work is about having the opportunity to capitalize on a workforce that is not location dependent, that jobs can be located anywhere, that we should be thinking in a location agnostic way. And that is, I think, the ambition we need to work towards. And that will, I think, feed into the whole idea of resilience, diversity, and regional balance. The second aspect of context I want to just quickly run through is around social and societal. And again, when we responded to COVID, one of the first things that we realized, I think, was that the social economy was perhaps the strongest, most resilient aspect of Irish society, because it was when things were locked down that people started to look more locally. Our worlds shrank. We began to think more about our neighbors, about how people could be looked after, that we could care for each other in many, many ways. And our responses to the COVID pandemic were very much dictated by, I think, looking after ourselves and one another. So well-being, it needs to continue to be a critically important issue for us. But cohesion also. And I say cohesion deliberately as opposed to inclusion, because I think cohesion goes beyond the idea of inclusion. It's around, not about everybody feeling part of a society, but it's about everybody being given a fair opportunity to really contribute in a positive, meaningful way, subject to their own abilities and aspirations. And finally, equality. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we'd still struggle, and we have many challenges when it comes to equality in our society that need to be addressed. The third aspect of the context is around the climate and biodiversity challenges and crises that we face. I think there's a recognition now of the necessity to deal with both. Government is very clear about that. I think there's also an acceptance that there's a shared responsibility amongst all of us, government, private sector, individuals, communities, and otherwise, to try to address these issues. But we also need to, I think, frame these challenges in the context of opportunities that are presenting, and there are many when it comes to business, when it comes to the way we live our lives, and the way we interact with our planet and the environment around us. There's a huge amount of opportunity. And the final point of context is in terms of policy, because I think it is important that we recognize the role of policy in enabling all of the above. Government has very ambitious policies across a vast range of areas at the moment, including, of course, and starting from our rural future, which sits as part of a kind of a matrix of strategic policies for government. We need to ensure that that ambition is maintained, that policies are integrated with one another, that speak to one another, and that partnerships enable that. And I will come back to the issue of partnerships a little bit later in the discussion. That all has informed how we've approached the new rural development policy. And this slide, I hope, gives you a bit of a sense quickly of our thinking around how we approach a strategic approach to sustainable development, not just in rural areas, but more generally, where there is an interdependence between an interaction between people, planet, partnership, prosperity, place, and indeed peace. And we cannot risk neglecting one over another. We need to ensure that we're focused on all and the interplay between each and every aspect of that cycle. The policy that we have now, of course, hasn't been licked off the stones, as they say in Mayo, but there's a long history, of course, of policy development in this area over many years in Ireland. I'm just going to speak more about the recent history, the '99 White Paper on Rural Development, which remains a really seminal document. The report of the Commission for the Economic Development of Rural Areas, the Action Plan for Rural Development 2017, and the establishment of the Department of Rural and Community Development, which really was a watershed moment, I think, in Irish public policy history, frankly, where this department was focused on the mandates around community development and rural development. Project Ireland 2040, of course, set a strategic framework for all of government and all of national policy, and indeed our rural future speaks to many of the ambitions therein and is complementary to them. And our rural future was finally published last March, so we're, hard to believe, already coming up on 1 year into the policy implementation. So what is it about then? What do we try to achieve, and what is the approach that this policy is pitching in relation to rural development? Well, first of all, it's a 5-year policy. It's a whole of government approach. And actually, I would argue it's a whole of society approach, because frankly, there's a recognition therein that it is not possible to achieve real prosperity and sustainability without the whole of society coming on board, which is why this policy articulates a vision, which I will come back to in a moment. It's based around sustainability in all of its facets and the interaction between all, economic, social, and environmental. It's also based on the recognition that rural and urban areas are interdependent in so many ways, economically, socially, culturally, and otherwise. The policy proposes an integrated and a place-based approach to development, very much recognizing the role of community-led local development, which this country has a long and proud history of. It also seeks to maximize the coherence, the impact, and the effectiveness of investment. And that speaks to a point I made earlier around policy alignment and coherence. So what is the vision then that we're presenting in this policy? The vision is for a thriving rural Ireland, which is integral to our national economic, social, cultural, and environmental well-being and development. Built on the interdependence of urban and rural areas, recognizing the centrality of our people, the importance of vibrant and lived-in rural places, and the potential to create quality jobs and to sustain our shared environment. And that's our overarching vision, which we think is incredibly important because it allows us the scope to ensure that this document is a living document that can develop organically over the lifetime of the policy, with new measures being added, new priorities being articulated, but always towards that common end and that common vision. Practically speaking, the policy is focused on a wide range of thematic areas. For those of you who haven't had a chance to familiarize yourself with it, I would encourage you to do so. But in summary, it has more than 150 commitments right across government, with key priorities relating to those priorities that were articulated by the people of rural Ireland. We invested considerable energy in engaging with communities right across Ireland over a number of years, in all sorts of forms, to try to gauge what were the priorities for rural people, for people living and working and enjoying rural areas, and this very much speaks to that. High-speed broadband emerges consistently as the high priority, and that remains a very high priority of this policy, and obviously speaks to priorities across government. And recognize that there is more to be done there, but that it remains a very high priority. Linked to that is around the idea of remote or connected working, and the potential that has, not just to transform the economic landscape in this country, but also to transform lives and to transform the way people, the time that people have available to invest in their families, in their communities, in their own well-being or otherwise. And again, to capitalize on that movement that we've seen over the last 2 years, where there is an appetite from people to enjoy, the public realm, to exercise outdoors, to enjoy the green spaces, to have time with their families and with their communities, and to potentially abandon, where that's possible, it won't be possible for all, abandon the long commutes that were so sadly a big part of many people's lives prior to the pandemic. The policy is also focused on supporting employment and careers, because the policy is very strongly of the view that rural areas don't deserve sympathy. Rural areas are places of huge opportunity from all sorts of aspects, including employment and careers. And I'm very pleased to see that both the IDA and Enterprise Ireland have recently made very strong soundings around investment in rural areas and in terms of regional development, and the investment numbers are improving continuously. So that's a very important signal, I think. Revitalizing rural towns and villages and dealing with issues around dereliction and vacancy, we all understand is a very strong issue, and our Rural Future speaks to that, and some of our programs are being designed deliberately to address many of those issues, and I'll come back to that. And last but not least on this slide is around the participation of communities. I said it before, communities have been central to this policy, and they will continue to be so as we develop it. Events such as today are another part of that process to ensure that we are all speaking to one another, sharing our experience and our research and so on, and feeding back into the policy cycle. Other focus areas are around public services, engagement of young people, such as through the Rural Youth Assembly, capitalizing on the transition, the green and digital and circular economy transitions, the just transition, and ensuring that rural Ireland benefits from those transitions. Supporting the sustainability of agriculture, the marine and forestry, and attracting more young female farmers, which we recognize is a very important and problematic, frankly, issue in rural areas, that we still do not have a situation where there's equality in the agricultural sector in many ways, and there needs to be those barriers that are in place need to be broken down to ensure that we that young females see the agricultural sector as a really viable proposition for themselves. Ensuring the sustainability and viability of island and coastal communities is of course very much important to us, as well as is the nurturing the tourism industry, culture, and our heritage. I mentioned earlier about the importance of policy coherence, and that I will emphasize it again now, because it is really a critical issue. Often you hear about various governments or government departments or agencies or whatever it may be operating in silos, quote unquote. One of the critical ways to avoid that, the potential for operating in silos, is if you can really ensure coherence across government. First of all, a cross-governmental policy is a really good opportunity to avoid that kind of a situation. This policy is overseen ultimately by the Cabinet, and it is overseen by the Taoiseach, and therefore there is a cross-governmental accountability to it, which is very, very important. But also it requires a bit more than that. So we've invested a lot of efforts to try to ensure that the policy is aligned with various other governmental policies, national planning framework, and policies around remote work, circular economy, and the SDGs, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to dwell on the investments, because I think people will be aware that there's a significant amount of investment, and actually it's more, the important thing is not around investment, but it's around outcome. But for the purposes of the context, I think it is important still to just bear in mind that there is more investment now in rural areas than there probably ever has been before, from the investments in high-speed broadband, to investment in such as the Rural Regeneration and Development Fund, or the equivalent Urban Development Fund, investment in the town centre first approach, or investment in the outdoor recreation facilities, and in remote working infrastructure, and so on. There is a significant amount of investment underway at the moment, but the challenge now and the opportunity for all of us and for society is how we build on all of this investment, and how we ensure that the investment complements other efforts, and that we can ensure that there's a value added from the investments. So just to quickly give you a sense of some of the other focus areas and some, I suppose, things that might be coming down the tracks in the relatively near future. Town centres, of course, has been a very strong focus of our rural future. It's been a very strong focus of this department in terms of regenerating towns. But I think there's more and more of a recognition of the importance of vibrancy in Irish towns and villages, and recognizing that vacancy and dereliction has a very real cost, not just for the economies, but also for society, because it has a very dissuasive effect on a society. It has a very negative effect on societies when we see vacancy and dereliction. So this is a very high priority, and obviously it relates to work that's underway in terms of the Housing for All policy, and there are major challenges there. Let's be very honest about that. But one of the key actions that our department will be progressing very, very soon in the next number of weeks is the publication of our new Town Centre First policy and the associated actions with that. Supporting communities to develop master plans is another area of focus, and there's funding available under the Town and Village Renewal Scheme on that front to support that type of endeavour, where communities can develop their own visions for their areas, and those master plans then can inform and support funding applications and so on and so forth, and create a kind of cohesion amongst communities in rural areas. The Islands policy, for any of you who are following Islands policy issues, of course, is a very strong priority for us. When we were developing our rural future, we also engaged with island communities, and there are very specific needs and opportunities for islands and coastal areas. So there's a new policy going to be developed on that front, and it's underway consultation at the moment. And then just to give you a sense of some other areas of focus around outdoor recreation, agri-food, very strong focus, of course, as I said, on social inclusion, and our social inclusion community activation program is critically important. We shouldn't, as I said, underestimate the importance of trying to achieve a really cohesive community and society, and that is as important in rural areas as it is in urban areas. Supports around community and voluntary sector more generally, and capitalizing, I think, on the social capital that we have in rural areas is going to continue to be an important focus for us, as is the development of new innovative policy interventions, such as in terms of developing dark skies and so on. I also want to just draw your attention to the international dimension of Irish rural policy, because this is very important. We see ourselves as a small country at the center of the world. And I think that Ireland, even though we are a small country, we have a lot to share. We have a lot to learn from others also. But I think it's really important that we recognize where we are doing things well, and sharing that and interacting with our international colleagues at EU level and the OECD level. There have been a number of important developments over the last even year. For instance, at the EU level, the new long-term vision for rural areas, which is very closely aligned to our rural future. And we're very pleased to be able to contribute to the development of that document. This is important, though, because it's critically important that across the European Union and the various funding and other support schemes that are being developed at an EU level are cognizant of the kinds of issues that we are thinking about when it comes to sustainable rural development, particularly in the context of the development of the new CAP and the Future Leader Programme and all of these kinds of elements, and to ensure that there's a real understanding of the needs and the opportunities in rural areas. OECD, likewise, critically important work happening there in terms of the Rural Working Party at the OECD, and I might mention something about that in a few more minutes. So how then do we translate all of this ambition into practical support for communities? I mentioned a couple of the funding schemes that we have. There are many, many others, but I'm just giving you a sense of a few. The Rural Regeneration and Development Fund, of course, is the big fund, and you know, it really is having a transformational effect on communities throughout the country, and it is something that you know, is now very, very strongly aligned to our rural future, as are all of our schemes, because we've deliberately ensured that they are speaking to the ambition of our rural future. I mentioned the Leader Programme already. The Leader Programme probably needs no mention here. I'm sure you're all very, very familiar, but it is important to recognise that Leader and the future iteration of Leader will serve the objectives of our rural future. I think it's fair to say. It is something that's obviously being worked through at the moment, and you know, the new Leader Programme will be rolled out from 2023. But it is critically important that it's a critically important part of the architecture to support rural development. Our town and village renewal scheme, I've discussed that already, and our outdoor recreation scheme. Again, this scheme has come to particular prominence, I think, in the last year and a half, where we have just seen across society such a strong uptick in people exercising outdoors, enjoying the outdoors, perhaps largely related to the COVID public health guidelines and so on, where people were required to be more outside. But isn't that great? And isn't that a real vindication of the investment in our greenways, in our blueways, in our various outdoor facilities, and of course our investments in public realm and so on. And that needs to continue, because that is obviously a well-being proposition, but it's also important for our economic development, to be quite frank. If we are seeking to really ensure a balanced regional development, we need to think about a holistic offering, an offering that includes broadband, you know, recreation facilities, housing, healthcare, transport links, and so on and so forth, in a holistic way. ConnectedHubs.ie. This goes back to the point I made earlier around the remote working hubs and the potential that remote working has to actually transform this country, to be quite honest with you, because the hub network at the moment, our department has mapped more than 500 hubs that exist in the length and breadth of Ireland, and more than 170 of them are currently registered with the Connected Hubs program, the ConnectedHubs.ie, and we anticipate and we hope that number will increase dramatically up to more than 400 by the end of this year. What we want to see is that these hubs are recognized as safe, secure, well connected, and with predictable high standards of services for those who wish to potentially relocate to rural areas, to remain in rural areas, or to potentially use these hubs on an ad hoc basis. If a person is, for instance, on a holiday in the West Coast, they could pop into a hub for a day and do the day's work in a hub, or whatever the case may be. So it's really, I think, important, again, to stress that when we talk about remote work, we need to scrap the idea that remote work is exclusively the box room. Remote work in the box room is not healthy remote work necessarily. You know, we need to think about location agnostic employment, and the Connected Hubs, I think, network is going to be a huge asset in that regard. I might come close to the end actually and invite a question or two, because I'm conscious of the time. But before I do that, I want to just point to the fact that Ireland will be, and we're delighted that we have been successful in securing the hosting of the OECD's International Rural Development Conference later this year. It'll take place at the end of September. And it is going to be a unique opportunity for Ireland to really lead out on the dialogue around rural development, the future for rural development, and how we really secure thriving rural places. So this is something I would encourage you all to look out for, and invite you obviously to participate in whatever way is appropriate. In due course, we'll be sharing more information about that in the weeks to come. So before I finish, what does success look like then in relation to rural policy? Well, we would boil it down to a few points. We would like to see more people living and working in rural areas. rural towns becoming vibrant hubs for commercial and for social activity, reduced regional income disparities, which speaks against the regional development issue, improved access to public services such as transport links, ensuring that rural Ireland benefits from the transition to a more sustainable future in a meaningful way, and that rural communities, including young people and others, have a very direct and active role in shaping their future, which is what we're trying to do through our forums such as the Rural Ideas Forum, the Rural Youth Assembly, and these kinds of events. So they're very important. So this is what we see success looking like. But one last word before I wrap this up is around the partnerships and the importance of this kind of an event. It is really important to note that we recognize higher education institutions in this country as being key drivers of economic, social, and environmental progress. That is part of the reason why we have developed and set up the higher education and research network on rural development, with a view to trying to bring together in a structured way academic and other research institutions to harness that I suppose the collective intellect and wisdom, but also try to ensure complementarity between research agendas, to help inform us, to maximize the evidence-based approach to policy development, but also to help us to ensure that this document is really adopting the living instrument principle. And what I mean by that is that the 150 odd measures that are in this document that you will see when you download it from the internet is not necessarily static, but it can change from year to year with new measures to be added, others to be potentially concluded, and that will continuously happen over the lifetime of the policy. The policy will be reported on twice per year with work programs developed in the start of the new year. Just a little diagram on the right, you may be well familiar with it, but it's the quintuple helix. We've seen the triple and the quadruple, but the quintuple, I think, captures best our view of how we work in partnership, because we see ourselves working with academia, industry, and civil society, community and voluntary organizations more generally, local and regional authorities, but also in a broader context of our environment with our media, with others. And that's really what will help us to do our job as best we can. So I'm gonna, I think, stop with just a summary of the vision, which is for a rural Ireland that's integral to our national economic, social, cultural, and environmental well-being and development. For us to achieve that, it needs to be more than a government policy. It needs to be a national policy, and it requires, I think, the input and the leadership of all communities in the country and all of you on this call. So I'm going to stop there, and Maura, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Thanks very much.
Andrew, thanks so much. It's amazing just to hear how much is in the policy, how much so many elements of the policy will be relevant to a lot of the research that's going on around the country, but also a lot of the practice and the practitioners that are working around the country. A lot of this policy has huge relevance to all of them. And I think Andrew has outlined that so very, very well. So we're absolutely delighted with that presentation. I think it gave us a great overview. And I think we decided to start with the idea of policy because in some ways it has an overarching kind of a thinking in relation to the work that we do. And a lot of the research that we do really has to have that practical element on the ground. There's no point sometimes in us researching issues in and around rural that have no element of practice. And I think connecting that with the policy environment from the beginning is what we aim to do. So Andrew, thank you very much for that. I have a couple of colleagues, Aisling Murta and Louise Weir, who have been checking the chat. Now, as we said from the beginning, because there's so many people on the link that we didn't have too much time for interaction and engagement. And it really is for disseminating information as much as engaging, but connecting and engaging with people afterwards is quite possible, and that can be done as well. But I might call on Louise or Aisling maybe just to bring up a couple of the comments or the questions for Andrew.
Jump in, I'll try and theme some of them, Andrew. There's lots of them running through. Thank you for a lovely, wonderful presentation. Some is coming in about LEADER, Andrew, and the reduction in the funding that came through that, or if you'd have any insight on the impact of that within the communities. And another one linked to that was the idea of that agri-food is a focus area of our rural future. And if you'd have any insight on the recently included Rural Food Initiative, if you think something like it might be rolled out again. And in the same vein, on the rural areas, we did another comment suggesting that there was a good response to you suggesting that we need to move on from this idea of rural being considered as something less or something negative, and we need to think about its positives and strengths and start helping the communities from that point of view, and what are the needs and what are the attributes that they have that we can build on. So a couple of things there maybe to start us off.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the questions. And look, I'm sure there's plenty more for us to discuss, but I'll just try to touch on some of them. As regards the LEADER program, to be very honest, you know, I'm probably the wrong person to talk to about that. Really, it's something that's dealt with by other colleagues in the House. But all I would say simply on that, of course, is that it's clearly a work in progress. You know, and I think our colleagues are working very closely, you know, across the system, with all of the relevant stakeholders to ensure that the new LEADER program is fit for purpose. As regards the food initiative, similarly, again, Department of Agriculture would be probably more relevant in that regard. But I do think that, you know, any initiatives that can stimulate you know, innovation when it comes to I suppose adding value in terms of agri-food produce would be very much welcome and worth pursuing. But on that one, if you need some more information, you can send something to me subsequently. The final point, though, on the issue of, you know, the peripherality of rural and so on, you know, I'm glad we agree. I think that it's really, we need to be moving away definitively from the idea of sympathy and solidarity with rural Ireland. We need to move away from that. We need to recognise the huge potential, in rural areas, the huge innovation that's being shown on a daily basis. By the way, including in the agri sector, continuously, and that we need to try to capitalise on that. The challenge probably is more around sharing the good experiences around Ireland, because there are, on a local level, in communities and towns and villages all over the country, there are so many good experiences that can be shared and could be potentially directly replicated. But the challenge is how we ensure that's disseminated properly. Maybe the sort of, you know, the digital revolution, doing our Zooms and so on, has actually assisted us to some extent by making it a bit easier to exchange in these kinds of formats. But I think really that is our challenge, is to ensure that we build on the experience we have. We have a lot of good experience, and also build on the bad experience and learn from it.
Andrew, some very good insights there and some very good questions as well. And I'm going to call in Aisling now, but I also see some different questions from around the world as well. I see a nice question here from South Africa as well. And I'm going to ask Aisling maybe to have a question or two for Andrew.
Yeah, I'll just kind of try and draw on another theme that's emerging kind of around the environment. And we have Conor O'Brien highlighting, you know, the good programs that you have mentioned, Andrew, that support environmental objectives, the Sustainable Energy Community Network as well, that can support them. So I think there's kind of congratulations and complementarities coming out there in other programs that can complement our rural future. And you mentioned, related to kind of the whole of government approach, and as kind of a specific question around the climate action plan and how kind of there's maybe some conflicts in the, I suppose, the social and economic objectives in relation to decarbonisation. And if you had any kind of insights on how these are reconciled or approaching that in terms of our rural future.
Thanks, Aisling. Great questions. And I also saw another one come in there in the chat around work plans. And just to deal with that one first, yes, there's annual work programs are prepared by the department to accompany our rural future, which are much more detailed around timelines, actors for delivery, all of that kind of thing. They're all publicly available. Well, there's only one so far because we're only in the first year of the policy, but that's available on the DRCD website. Likewise, once the progress reports are signed off by government, they will be made publicly available online as well, and the new work program will be developed in the next month and a half or so. So that's all going to be publicly available. I'm thankful to the person who mentioned the issue of the environment. I think there's a lot of schemes that are really innovative, that are working, I think, going to work extremely favourably for communities. One of them in particular is the Renewable Energy Support Scheme, the RES scheme, which I think is really innovative, probably deserves more attention because it just offers such a huge opportunity to communities to establish cooperative or social enterprises around renewable energy with a very much risk reduced sort of scenario in terms of the investments and so on. Offers a great potential for public-private partnerships. So I would certainly encourage communities to have a look at that as well. As regards the whole of government approach, I don't accept that there are conflicts actually at all. I think that what there are the question is, are we going to progress with an ambitious vision about a diverse, sustainable rural economy, or do we want to kind of trap ourselves with nostalgia, the old rural idyll? The old rural economy is not necessarily the future rural economy. I don't think there's any kind of dichotomy or conflict between our rural future and what we're trying to achieve in the Climate Action Plan. On the contrary, I think they're perfectly complementary. The question is, how do we support communities and how do we support individuals to adapt to the new opportunities that are ahead of us? And that includes in the agricultural space, by the way. I mean, I come from a farming background in South Mayo, and my lived experience in that situation was that farmers innovate every single day of the week. Every single day of the week, they adapt to changing conditions and circumstances, and I think this is an opportunity like no other to do so. But I think the challenge is, how do we do this together? And that we get away from the really, I think, quite sad narrative where there's sort of one group in society being pitted against one another, or that we see that there's conflicts between policy ambitions. That is simply, I think, something we need to leave behind. We need to find a way to work together. None of us have all the answers, but we need to try to, as I said, collaborate and reassure and support. And government indeed needs to, I think, recognize if there are areas which need more support and step up to the mark in that regard. So that's just what I'd say on that point.
Great, Andrew, thanks a million. I suppose to stick to time, and we knew that today we were going to be short maybe on a little bit of time in relation to questions because of our official launch today. But our aim for the seminar is really that we will try and stay to the hour and that people can gain an insight into rural practice, rural research, rural policy, whatever is going on in relation to rural issues in the country within the hour. And I think that was kind of our aim for the seminar series, and I think we've achieved that today. I'm sure there are some other very, very good questions. There are some great connections all across the country. So it really does show, as Andrew said, that there's a positivity around issues of rurality at the moment that I think that we need to bring to the series. And we also need to maybe open up, and no more than, I suppose, sometimes in the departments as well, they're often accused of hiding themselves away. And we are accused of that as well in the university, people kind of doing this research behind closed doors. And I think that's why I particularly love rural research, because it's not behind closed doors, it's right out in the middle of communities, and that's where we research, that's what we do. So I think bringing all of that to all of you is what we aim to do, particularly over the next year. So over the next few months in particular, we will have members of the Our Rural Future Higher Education and Research Network right across the country in different institutes and different universities, giving their research, disseminating what they're actually doing in relation to their rural research at the moment, including some of the work that we're doing as well in Galway. So we're hoping, I suppose, the last Wednesday of every month from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock that you will tune in to us and maybe, I suppose, hopefully be informed in some way or other, just as you were informed today by Andrew Forde. So I want to in particularly thank Andrew today for a really great insight to the Rural Futures policy. I suppose it's often very easy for us to take these policies and maybe throw them aside without seeing the amount of energy and work and effort that comes to these policies from people like Andrew and his colleagues in the department. So I want to particularly thank Andrew for his presentation today. I also want to thank, I suppose, President Ciarán Ó from the University here in Galway for launching our seminar series and for his commitment to rural studies and rural research. I want to in particular thank Minister Humphreys and the Department of Rural and Community Development, again, for collaborating with us in NUI Galway for this seminar series. I want to thank all of you for logging on today. And again, I want to thank, I suppose, my colleagues in the Rural Studies Centre in Galway, Louise and Aisling, who helped out today, particularly Shane, who helps out on a regular basis, but also did a huge amount of the background work and the graphics for today's seminar as well, and who continues to do that for us. So I want to particularly thank Shane, and for any other members of the Rural Studies Centre that are on with us as well today, I want to thank them. But again, thanks to Andrew Forde for being our seminar speaker today, and we really hope we will see you all again at the end of February for our next seminar series, and we will post it very quickly on social media, the next speaker for the seminar series. So Goramila Mahagat, and thank you all very much for joining us today. Have a good
Thanks very much, everybody, for your attention. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Gabriel.
Thanks, guys. Thanks very much. A very good evening.
Thanks a million.